So as I'm recording this video, Game 1 of the 2021 NBA Finals is tonight between the Phoenix Suns and the Milwaukee Bucks, and I'm really excited for this series. If you guys watch my channel, you know after the first round ended in this playoffs, I made an updated version of my bracket, and be sure to check that video out as well. It'll be at the top right hand side of your screen right now, but I actually predicted this as the NBA Finals between the Phoenix Suns and the Milwaukee Bucks, and I think this is going to be a really good matchup, and I think it's going to be really entertaining. Mostly throughout these playoffs, a lot of NBA fans have said that this playoffs in general haven't been that good because we've seen a lot of the very good teams like the Lakers and the Nets get eliminated early on, and lots of injuries throughout the playoffs with the superstar players throughout the NBA. But this right here is going to be a really interesting finals. These teams match up really interestingly, and in this video I'm going to be giving you guys my preview, my analysis, and my prediction on this series. So let's get right into it. So right when this finals matchup was set and the Suns and Bucks won their respective conference final matchups, something that stood out to me right away is how these are statistically, in terms of defensive rating, the two very best defensive teams in the NBA playoffs, and in my opinion, definitely the two best defensive teams in general in the NBA. Both of these teams play pretty good styles of defense that really allow them to succeed as an overall unit. The Bucks throughout the playoffs have a 105 defensive rating, which is number one in the entire NBA playoffs. They do a really good job on rotations on the perimeter. They have great one-on-one defenders, guys like PJ Tucker, who constantly makes it tough on the other team's best or second best player night in and night out. He does a great job on-ball defense. A guy like Jrue Holiday, who I'll be talking about specifically a little bit later on in the video as well. He's an amazing perimeter defender, one of the very best in the game at that. And obviously Giannis is a fantastic on-ball and off-ball defender as well. He's won the Defensive Player of the Year for a reason, and overall as a team too, they do a really good job at getting back in transition, and this has a lot to do with effort. I talked about this in my recent video too, about how they were able to beat the Atlanta Hawks. They did a great job specifically in that series of getting back in transition. They play very smart defensively, play very well to percentages, and overall they have a very good defense, and it's no secret that they are one of, if not the very best defensive team in the NBA. The Phoenix Suns also have a very good defense. I think they might be the very best defensive team in the NBA right now. They've had a defensive rating of about 106.5 in the NBA playoffs, which is second behind only the Bucks. They are very good at shrinking the floor and making adjustments to teams that don't shoot the three well, and this could definitely play a factor in this series. Again, I'll talk about that a little bit later on as well. They have a lot of very versatile defenders and very good on-ball defenders. Guys like Mikal Bridges, who is a very good on-ball defender. A guy like Jay Crowder, also very good on-ball, very versatile. A guy like Cameron Johnson's very versatile and switchable as well. They have a great defensive anchor in DeAndre Ayton, and a very good perimeter defender in Chris Paul. They're also very good at defending the pick and roll, which is going to play a huge part in this series. Overall, these teams have very good defenses, and it's going to be interesting to watch how they match up against the other team's offense in this series. So let's start by talking about how the Suns offense is going to match up against the Bucks defense. The pick and roll in this matchup right here is going to be really interesting. We know that Brook Lopez did make the all-defensive second team last year. That's just how good he can be defensively, but specifically this year and specifically in the pick and roll, he's just been a complete liability. We saw that in the series against the Atlanta Hawks, how he was pretty much unplayable at times in the pick and roll because of how bad his defense was and how he dropped way too far in the pick and roll, and he's pretty much only the good thing he's good at in the pick and roll defensively is playing drop, and against a guy like Trae Young that obviously didn't work, and against a guy like Chris Paul who's so dominant in the mid-range area off of the pick and roll, this is going to be basically impossible for Lopez to defend when he's playing drop. So expect a lot more minutes from Bobby Portis in this series and less minutes from Lopez. Mike Budenholzer has to make that adjustment in this series just like he did in the series against the Atlanta Hawks, and it should be interesting too. Giannis should be back for game 1 here. If he isn't, it's really going to hurt the Bucks, obviously. That goes without saying, but I think if he gets back, he should play a lot of center minutes on defense as well. He can guard the pick and roll pretty effectively, so I think when they play the pick and roll against Chris Paul, they need to have Bobby Portis and Giannis guarding that. Now, I'm also really excited to see the matchup here between Jrue Holiday and Devin Booker. Devin Booker has absolutely dominated this playoff run. For me in this playoff run, he's shown that he's a top 15 player in the NBA. He did have a really tough time against Patrick Beverley, and I expect him to have a tough time against Jrue Holiday as well. Throughout the playoffs, he averaged 27 points per game, 6.5 rebounds, and 5 assists on about 57% true shooting, and he was really efficient throughout the entire playoffs up until the matchup against the Clippers, where Beverly did a really good job against him. He was shooting almost 50, 40, 90 throughout the first 2 rounds of the playoffs, but a matchup like he had against Beverly, you can definitely expect that against Jrue Holiday as well. Booker might not have the greatest series, and Drew's going to make it really tough on him. We've seen throughout the playoffs how Jrue did a really good job in that Miami series, first of all guarding Goran Dragic, but also having a lot of time guarding Jimmy Butler. In the Nets series, he was absolutely fantastic. His play on the defensive end of the floor was absolutely the difference in that series. He had a lot of matchups against Kyrie Irving, which he did very well in, a lot of matchups against James Harden in the later games in that series, and even against Kevin Durant. KD still dominated, but the fact that he could contain a guy that was 9 inches taller than him just because of his incredible perimeter defense and scrappy on-ball defense, that's just absolutely insane. And then he did a fantastic job against Trae Young in that Eastern Conference Finals series. That right there proved that Jrue Holiday is at least a top 10 defender in this league, and he's going to do the exact same thing against Devin Booker here. He's going to make it really tough on him, and that matchup is going to be really key for the Bucks. If Jrue can shut him down, that's the only time that they're going to have a really good chance to potentially win this series. I think overall the Suns will still succeed offensively throughout this series because of the pick and roll, and also because of their depth and how they have a lot of role players that can step up, specifically with shooting. I mean, guys like Cameron Johnson, Mikal Bridges, Jay Crowder, Cameron Payne, and Torrey Craig not only just step up in one-on-one matchups and can play really well on their own offensively, but all of these guys are really good shooters from 3 and can space the floor really well. And as a team, the Suns have shot 37.3% from 3 as a team in this playoffs and have a very deep team offensively. So overall, this will be an interesting matchup, the Suns offense versus the Bucks defense, but overall I think the Suns will be able to succeed a little bit more than other teams have against the Bucks defense. So let's talk about the other side of the floor here, the Bucks offense versus the Suns defense. And really on both ends of the floor for that matter, the Bucks play is really going to depend on the health of Giannis. We know that he hyperextended his knee in Game 4 in the Eastern Conference Final against the Atlanta Hawks, but I assume that he will play in Game 1. It is the finals, and from what I've heard, he's probably going to play. But other than that, the offense of the Milwaukee Bucks is going to completely depend on their 3-point shooters. Giannis will be doing his thing. He's absolutely dominated the playoffs, but if his shooters are knocking down threes, the Suns are going to build that wall and really dramatically shrink the floor like they have done throughout this entire series, and specifically against LeBron and the Lakers. I mean, we saw in that series in the first round how the Suns were just able to completely dominate, specifically down the road in that series, mostly because Anthony Davis was out, but specifically because they were able to shut down LeBron to a point where he was having a lot of trouble in the paint because they just completely shrunk the floor. They played a style of zone 2, and really all 4 guys that were playing off ball would really crowd the paint, and the Lakers just simply couldn't hit a 3. They just couldn't hit anything. It wasn't even because the Suns were contesting him that well. They just knew they couldn't hit a 3, and they really shrunk the floor effectively. Now the Bucks in the regular season shot about 38% from 3, and we know that they have a lot of great shooters that they really added this season as well. I've talked about that on the channel a lot, but for some reason in the playoffs, they're shooting absolutely horribly from 3, and I'm actually really impressed with the fact that they're still here despite this bad shooting. They're only shooting 30% from 3 in the playoffs. Their shooters are really going to have to step up, be able to knock down a few shots, and because of this be able to space the floor for specifically Giannis. They're going to have to do this if they even want a chance against the Suns defense. Another big difference between the two teams is their depth, and I talked about this earlier on a little bit, but the Bucks don't have a lot of great role players that can really step up specifically with their shooting, and the Suns do, and I think that could be a difference for the Suns offense against the Bucks defense. But if the role players for the Bucks aren't stepping up, it'll be really tough for them as well to succeed against the Suns defense that, like I mentioned, is really going to shrink the floor. I also think it'll be a really interesting matchup to see DeAndre Ayton go up against Giannis in the paint. He has defended a lot of elite centers in this playoffs like Nikola Jokic in the second round and Anthony Davis, but last series he didn't have a tough matchup offensively against his counterpart center, and against a center like Giannis, I don't know if he'll be able to be the same effectiveness defensively because Giannis is one of those guys that can get ahead of steam when he's coming in transition and driving towards the basket, but I think Ayton still is elite enough of a defender to be able to contain him a little bit on his own. And like I mentioned, if the Bucks aren't knocking down threes, it's not just going to be Ayton versus Giannis. It's going to be 3 or 4 guys against Giannis. And if it gets to this point, the Bucks are going to be completely helpless. I think if they don't at least shoot an average percentage from 3, around 35 or 36% from 3, which is asking a ton since, as I mentioned, they've only shot 30% from 3 in the playoffs, they're going to be helpless if they don't shoot this percentage of around 36%. So it's really going to depend on how well their shooters play in this series, and if they play the way that they have throughout this entire playoffs, they're going to be helpless because this Suns defense is built for teams that don't shoot the 3 well. They're going to shrink the floor and make it really tough on Giannis, so the Bucks really got to knock down some threes here. Guys like PJ Tucker, Pat Connaughton, Brook Lopez, Bobby Portis, Drew Holiday, Chris Middleton, and anyone else on this team that's going to be shooting on the perimeter, they got to be ready to fire away that 3 and be able to space the floor for the Giannis and the Bucks. So in terms of my prediction for this series, I think it will be a close series, and my prediction here might not show that I think it's going to be a close series, but I'm going to take the Suns in 5. I really think that their defense is built to defend a team like the Bucks, and the Bucks don't really have enough shooting in my opinion to win this series. Like I mentioned, they're going to have to shoot at least an average percentage from 3 as a team, and I really don't think they have the ability to do that in the playoffs, unfortunately. It will be mostly a low-scoring series for the most part, with both defenses playing really well, but ultimately I think the Suns will be victorious. There will be multiple very close games in this series, but ultimately I think they will win the series in 5. Now, one more thing we do gotta talk about here, especially because if the Suns win, the Finals MVP conversation will be really interesting too. It's not like the past years like in 2019 where Kawhi was easily the Finals MVP, or in 2020 when LeBron was easily the Finals MVP. This is going to be a close one between Chris Paul and Devin Booker, and I do think that Devin Booker is the slightly better player, but I think Chris Paul is going to win this Finals MVP, mostly because what I talked about in the part about where I talked about the Suns' offense and how the pick and roll with Chris Paul and how he's going to operate in the mid-range is going to be probably a huge factor of success for them, and Devin Booker will be matched up against Drew Holiday and probably get contained a little bit by him. I think both of them will ultimately have a big impact on this series, but even defensively too, Chris Paul is a slightly better defender. He's going to have an impact defending the perimeter in this series, and also specifically in the pick and roll, like I mentioned, in the mid-range area, maybe hit a couple of threes off the pick and roll, and obviously have his incredible playmaking ability, one of the all-time great playmakers. He's going to have that ability along with his passing, and ultimately because Devin Booker will be defended by Drew and Chris Paul might have an easier matchup against the pick and roll defense of the Bucks, I think he's going to win this Finals MVP. It'll be amazing to see the Suns win if they do. I am hoping for them in this series. Chris Paul getting that ring is something he absolutely needs on his resume. It would be inspirational to see a guy like him get that ring. A guy like Devin Booker too, that's worked so hard throughout his career to get to this point, had constant disappointments of losing and not making the playoffs and getting up to this point right away. And overall, this Suns team, a guy like Jay Crowder, I'd be so happy for a guy like him, and I think it'd be really cool to see this team win. So there you have it. That's my analysis, my preview, and prediction on this series. I've got the Suns taking this series in 5. I do think it'll be close. I wanted to say Suns in 4 because of Suns in 4 guy, of course, but I do think the Bucks are definitely good enough to take a game here. And I got Chris Paul winning the Finals MVP and finally getting that very, very long-awaited first ring of his NBA career. Thank you all for watching this video. If you're new, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on any new videos. Comment down below your thoughts on today's video and your prediction for this year's NBA Finals. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you all next video.